really the goal is not to remove stress from our life. Although at first we might think it is, we might want to remove it because it's so uncomfortable. The goal is to live a full life, right?
Hey guys, I am so excited to be here today with Ben Ahrens. I don't know if you saw his previous interview on my channel, but it's one of my favorite of all time. It was so packed full of just usable, concise, helpful information, and Ben is just overall a really amazing human being. He's over in Long Island, New York, joining us today to tell us to dive into a few different topics. He's had his own journey with severe neurological Lyme disease. He was once bedridden and thankfully did fully recover, and now has a lot of insights to share about the power of neuroplasticity, and just a lot of really helpful, concrete information that can help people recover. He is the founder and CEO of Rewiring, and he also has his own really popular and helpful YouTube channel. So just really exciting to have you here today, Ben. Thank you so much for doing this.
Oh, thanks so much for having me back on, Raelan. And again, just hats off to you for being one of the few real catalysts that sparked me to start the YouTube channel about a year ago. And it's been a really exciting journey to put out what seems to be helpful content.
Yeah, it's so great to see YouTube growing as a space where there's a lot of information there, because we need people to know that this is a place that they can come to, and there's going to be a lot of different resources, because for a long time that wasn't the case. So it's really great to
Totally.
see things growing. So I'll link for people who didn't see your first video where you go in a lot more depth about your health journey, but just for people who might not be aware of it, can you share a little bit about what you went through with your health?
Yeah, sure. So taking it back even before my health journey or my sort of recovery journey started in my mid 20s, but even before that, I was always really, really fascinated with health and wellness, and specifically with the act of conditioning in some way. In my late teens, early 20s, I went down that road in a very literal way. As an exercise physiologist, I worked training athletes at my college, which was a Division I sports team. I worked as an assistant to a physical therapist, so I became interested in rehabilitation. And basically, what I was really fascinated with was just this concept, this idea that you could actually condition your body or condition a body part, and that would create significant changes to that body or that part's use and function. Then in my mid 20s, I was well on my way down the career path of functional exercise and writing for a local newspaper, actually here in Long Island, column called Fitness Matters. And in my mid 20s, I completely lost my health. It turned out to be chronic neurologic Lyme disease, but like so many, it took me years to get that diagnosis. And then, of course, once I got the diagnosis, it was very bittersweet, because it's like, great, we've got an answer, but actually we have no idea what the problem really is, let alone how to fix it. So that started me down the road of conventional treatments, antibiotics, all the run of the mill stuff, which in my case resulted in just going on stronger and stronger iterations of antibiotics, and then things to counter the negative effects of the antibiotics, to the point where in about 2010, 2011, I was on intravenous Rocephin, I was on oxygen condensers, I had severe sleep apnea, postural orthostatic tachycardia, all of these symptom clusters that seem to plague so many in the chronic Lyme, chronic fatigue, and fibromyalgia world. And that was a real eye-opener to me, because for the first time in my life, I couldn't, with my mechanistic understanding of the body, fix the problem. I couldn't really understand how it worked. And that led me into getting out of the hardware of the body business a little bit, and a little bit more into the software. What is the software, in this case, the brain and the nervous system, that drives the hardware, that regulates the hardware, and that modulates these key functions like the immune system, the endocrine system, and all of these systems that would normally keep us healthy, but once they go out of whack and become dysregulated, they can actually keep us ill.
I'm really appreciating how people like yourself are able to articulate this sort of hardware software problem that's happening, because the conversation around this is shifting, because for a long time it's an all in your head sort of situation that people were being told, which is very insulting and doesn't sound makes it sound like it's not real, but it's just understanding how the different systems in our body work. I heard it once explained, like if you have a laptop and you spill a drink on it, if you open up, you're going to see fried wires. There's going to be a hardware problem. But if it gets a virus or something else happens, you open it up, everything's going to look okay. But it doesn't mean that something
Yeah,
isn't equally as wrong. It's just a different approach to
right.
fixing it. So I think it's just normalizing and legitimizing that our bodies do work this way, and that we can sometimes have these dysregulated nervous systems that are causing some issues. I think one of the questions that people often have, though, is think, what causes this dysregulated nervous system, and what role does that play in chronic conditions?
Yeah, first of all, I love the computer analogy, and I think in this day and age, it makes it easier and easier to understand just that the actuality, that the existence or prevalence of these problems, but also the shortcomings of the previous or sort of still unfortunately mainstream approach of trying to just tackle the symptom. Because if you think of, like, I love the example you used of a computer virus, right, creating sort of havoc on your computer, and now imagine the virus that your computer has creates some dysregulation in the computer system that produces these, maybe pop-ups or something on the screen, something unwanted on the screen that you want to go away. Well, it's like the conventional approach would be, let's just paint over the screen, right? Let's make the screen look the way we want it. And that's exactly the same as treating symptoms, right? Unless we've actually gotten to the root cause issue that's producing those symptoms, anything that we do to just take a medicine or take something to take care of the symptom is really kind of like just painting over the screen and masking the problem. So in this case, the question is really, what causes a dysregulated nervous system? How do we get these software issues, or how do we wind up with them? And there's really a multitude of different factors, but if we really boil it down and distill it down, one of the things we describe in the Reorigin program is that there is this buildup of something called the allostatic load, which is essentially just the total load of stress on the nervous system. And when it comes to the brain and the nervous system, the brain doesn't really make distinctions between emotional stress, psychological stress, even physical, stressors, things like the presence of pathogens, or previous exposures. All of these just kind of lead to this buildup, such that when things overcome our capacity to handle these buildups, that's when we find the system starting to maladapt and sort of bend and break in these ways that leads to this ongoing dysregulation. And for a lot of people, but not always, they can point to a particular, what we call sort of like the insult to the injury. In my case, it was the Lyme or the tick bite. That might have been the straw that broke the camel's back, but the camel's back might not have broken if it wasn't already carrying this heavy load. And so for many people, they can point to a stressful life event or an infection or something that happened that seemed to cause this breaking of the dam. For many people, they can't necessarily, point to a single instance, but usually there is at the least this buildup of the allostatic load, and then something kind of like tips the scale, and now we find ourselves, stuck in these chronic patterns of hyperreactivity to things like even our own symptoms.
That helps me to understand it, because there's different ways that we come at this, or that I hear people talk about it, and it's that your nervous system is functioning perfectly fine, or it's because of the world that we now live in, it didn't evolve to thrive with computers and traffic and the news and Twitter and Reddit and all of that. So I think that just paints kind of a nice picture of, it is functioning as it should. It is in an environment not what it was created for, and because of that, we're getting that allostatic load. We're kind of tipping the scales beyond what it can manage, and then that's where we get this sort of hypersensitive dysregulation. That's what I'm understanding and what you're saying.
Yeah, so I mean, fortunately, the human brain and nervous system and body are incredibly resilient. We can basically handle an amazing amount of stuff, But like any biological system, there's also some limitations. And if that bucket keeps filling up with stressors, and because of a lot of the way we function in this day and age, call it like the holes in those buckets don't allow for the load to come down. I'll just say it's normal, and it's actually a good thing to take on stressors. We want stressors in our lives because to some degree they actually strengthen us. We also want to be able to recover from those stressors. And that's what we're seeing maybe becoming a little bit more challenging as we don't give our brains as much rest as we used to. And as we're just exposed to, as you mentioned, many different sources of stimulation at one time. But you raised a good point, which is that when someone finds themselves in this state of dysregulation, and they start to learn about neuroplasticity or how the brain or nervous system can dysregulate, one of the initial reactions is to feel like your brain has turned on you, right? Something that should be working for you and your body and your immune system, some things that should be working in your favor have now suddenly turned on you, and now they're just sort of like attacking your own system. And I just want to put a little caveat in that to say that your brain is still very much working for you. It just sometimes gets a little bit misguided, and it just needs an update. It needs an update of information. So the brain's first order of business is your survival. That's clear. That's just an evolutionary process. It has evolved to prioritize survival. And sometimes, given that that's the case, it will kind of default to a more protective response, even when it might not be fully warranted. Now, the brain's second order of business is efficiency. It wants to be, because the brain takes up about 20% of the body's resources, it wants to always be as efficient as possible. And the way that it does this is it creates shortcuts in the form of neural pathways. And these shortcuts often link together a certain event, thought, feeling, or sensation with what it deems as the appropriate reaction or response. So to give you an example, if I feel something that's uncomfortable, right? Let's say I feel a pain in my knee, for example. That will trigger a certain response in my nervous system that usually involves creation of some muscle tension, sometimes inflammation. And if I look and it turns out that I've hit my knee on the table, then that response is absolutely warranted, right? Because it's like something happened and now my body's resources are being allocated, toward there. What can sometimes happen is though that when this allostatic load gets high and then we hit our knee on the table, now the brain can sort of create that shortcut and learn to continuously produce that response. And so we might actually start to perceive that old pain in the knee, and then we look down and sure enough, there's no real issue there. We didn't just bang it on the table. But because the previous event happened, it sort of set up this neural network in the brain. And the crux of neuroplasticity is really about delinking these uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, or sensations from the bodily reaction that can often follow.
And I would imagine it would be a bit of, when we talk about that hypersensitivity or overreaction, that in that protective mode, making those shortcuts, it might, if you've hit your knee on the table a few times, it might just start to be table's bad. Maybe now you just walk by a table and your knee starts to hurt, like it's as a energy saving protective mode, keeping things efficient. So that's where that retraining would come in of tables are safe.
Exactly. And yeah, it would get to the point where, as you mentioned, you just look at the table or maybe even just think about a table, and all of a sudden you actually start to feel real pain from coming from the knee.
You said something that I think is going to really cause a lot of people's shoulders to drop. I know it did mine, about how stress is normal and stress is okay, and it's actually can be helpful because we are resilient people, because there's a
Mhm.
lot of us, myself included, who come through this and come to sort of the other side, so to speak, and are reintegrating back into life and become scared of stress,
Yeah.
scared of any sort of symptom, like, oh, this is, I've seen all the videos, this is what's going to make me sick again. Like, you know, have a really stressful week at work, or your boss is being a nightmare. You're like, ah, I can't handle this. But we can. So that is the good news. So it's just, I think all of those tools that we are using as we recover, we just have to continue to use them once we continue to navigate life, to keep reassuring ourselves that this is okay and it's safe and it's fine to feel stress,
Yes.
as long as we're managing that allostatic load.
Yes, yes. Managing the load, and then also managing our relationship to the things that are causing the discomfort, or what we would call the stressors. And one of the things that really initially caused me to also my shoulders to drop and breathe a sigh of relief was a paper I read that really kind of catalyzed my brain retraining journey for myself. It was a paper that came out in 2011 called Rewiring the Stress Response, a New Paradigm in Healthcare. And in this paper, they basically talk about how the brain is taking in different signals or information from the environment, and then basically the role of this part of the brain we refer to called the limbic system, or the amygdala, is it basically makes a snap decision. It makes a judgment. Is this safe or is this unsafe? And if it determines that this signal, and when I say signal coming from the environment, that includes our internal environment. So that includes, a feeling. It could be a grumbling in your stomach. It could be that pain in the knee. It can be a thought or an emotion as well. But any sensory information from the outside environment or the internal environment, the brain will take this information in. The limbic system will make this decision. Is this safe or is this unsafe? And depending on what decision, like where it comes down, it will completely change your physiology in relationship to the same thing, to the same piece of stimulus. And what I think was so hopeful about this paper, and maybe we can link to it, is that he actually, the crux of it and the takeaway is that you can actually change it once you become aware that this is happening, that your brain is either going, threat mode or challenge mode. You can consciously condition. This is where that conditioning comes back in. You can actually condition your limbic system to preferentially default more to the challenge mode. And when it's in that challenge state, we might still experience some of the same or similar physical alterations. For example, we might still experience, if it's like something that makes us anxious, we might still experience some elevation in heart rate, but the stroke volume of the heart will actually change to increase the amount of oxygen that we take in. So we might experience rapid breathing, but usually the depth of that breath will increase or deepen if we're in the challenge state. That means sort of leaning forward into the stressor, as opposed to the threat state, which is sort of tensing up and shying away from it. And this is something that we can, once we begin to understand this intellectually, we now have a choice, because we can practice becoming aware of which state we're in. And sometimes if we can identify it, what those triggers are, or as we call them in Reorigin, these sparks that can sort of catapult us into these states. And then most importantly, we can actually start to shift that. And this is where we get into sort of like the crux of brain retraining. And one of the things I always say in the Reorigin program, based on a quote that I've heard, but I don't know who to attribute it to. The quote goes, "Never in the history of being told to calm down did anyone actually ever calm down." Right? And basically the sentiment there is that understanding is important, but understanding alone isn't enough. We need to actually use our body and use these sort of bottom-up approaches to condition a different response in the brain and nervous system so that it basically gets a new message.
And this is a lot of what I'm hearing from people. I think we're doing a really good job as a whole, people watching, people with these channels, learning about this, understanding what's happening. The light bulbs are starting to go off. We're starting to see that this is real and have the buy-in, but then it can be very overwhelming to figure out where to start. And what do I
Yeah.
do about this nervous system regulation? So for people that are in that place, they're like, okay, I'm hearing you. Like, now what?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think a great place to start is simply by calming the nervous system. And there are some simple exercises that you can do. So one of them that I teach on my channel, I'll share it here as well, is when the nervous system is so-called dysregulated, that's really characterized by a feeling of chaos. And it actually results in sort of, you could say, a sort of chaos taking place in the body where brain waves, what would normally be or ideally be functioning in what's called coherence. If you look at this on a scan, you'd see different regions of the brain that are sort of tracking along the same patterns. When we feel this tired and wired feeling, the nervous system starts to deregulate. And one of the first things you'd see in a brain scan is all of a sudden these healthy patterns start to all go at different times, different amplitudes, different frequencies. And it basically shows that the brain starts competing for resources. And the same can happen in the body. The heart rate might be a little bit out of sync with the brain waves. And again, different parts of the body, organs and systems basically start competing for resources instead of harmonizing and flowing together. So one of the very literal ways that we can get back into a state of harmony is by creating rhythm. And there's a few different techniques and things. Some of them are called like bilateral stimulation, but I'll show just a couple of really quick ones right now, if that's all right. One thing people can do is they can cross their arms. So like so, and they can just do a little bit of tapping back and forth. And when I do this, I like to count it off, say with the right hand. So I'll say 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, and 4. And you can just go through a couple of cycles of an exercise like that. That can actually alone be sufficient to get back in sync and to start to feel like you're actually in a bit of a flow state. Now, one that I've taught on my channel that's gotten a lot of great feedback, so I know it's working really well for a lot of people, involves a double inhale. So it's inhaling with a double breath at the top. So we can try that right now. It's inhaling. And when you get to the top, you just take in a little more air, followed by a long exhale. And so altogether, I'll do that a couple times, but it'll be a little bit of a breathing pattern that looks and sounds like this. And then what you can do is you can actually start to combine some of these things. So you can combine that with maybe, snapping or clapping or something that has a bit of rhythm to it. And when you do something like a slow, deliberate breath with some bilateral stimulation, that type of a technique can actually help us to get out of chaos, get into flow, and already start to feel better, putting our brain in a more alpha state, which is just more conducive to efficient function, also decision making, creativity. For many of us who have been through conditions or maybe going through something, there's a lot of sense of urgency, as you would expect, right? Urgency to find solutions, to find the answers, to do research. However, when we are operating or doing anything from that state of urgency, we are almost sort of by definition not functioning optimally. Our brain is scattered. We end up spending a lot of time in what's known as the default mode network, where the brain is sort of constantly just scanning and scanning and scanning for what's important instead of actually latching onto it. So you can think of, by analogy, the default mode network is like we've all been probably browsing Netflix or YouTube or something and just been browsing for hours instead of actually, finding and selecting something. That's a mode that's very sort of inefficient for the brain and can keep us in overwhelm. And so simply taking a break to get into a pattern like the one I just showed you can get you out of that default mode network and into the salience network, where now your focus is in one place. And from that place, you can take steps forward. Another thing I would say when it comes to, if you're looking to start brain retraining and feeling overwhelmed, there's tons of great information, like on Raelan, on your channel, on mine as well. This is also, though, the reason why brain retraining programs exist. There's a lot of information out there, and we are swimming in a sea of it. And brain retraining programs like Reorigin exist because we have really consciously done the work for you and curated the best exercises, how to apply them. And at Reorigin, this shows up in the form of a 28-day program. So it's like, here's what you do on day one, here's what you do on day two, no overwhelm, no need to really seek or read a lot of additional materials and everything. It's really kind of laid out for you, and that can be very helpful as well. But yeah, to sum it up, I would say start with just calming the nervous system. That will put you in a better state to gauge and kind of identify what might be the right steps for you. And then if you do decide to take steps into a brain retraining program, you can certainly check out Reorigin, and by no means have a influence on or want to have a direct influence on anyone's decision, because there's a lot of great options out there in this day and age. I would always just say that whatever resonates with you most, that is likely going to be the one that you can stick to, that you can be consistent with, and that can help you to get the best results.
And once people start into whatever brain training program they choose, is this something that they need to keep up for the rest of their lives? What does that look like?
Yeah, that's a question that we get a lot. And the great thing about the proper implementation of brain retraining is that really the aim of brain retraining is to reestablish self-management to the system. And the hidden implication there is that our brains and bodies do have this ability to self-manage and to self-heal. And I've mentioned it before, but for anyone who's hearing this for the first time, just to prove this to you, if you've ever had a bruise or a paper cut or a scrape of any kind and that wound is now gone, that is proof that your body actually heals itself. So the aim of a brain retraining is not to impose or coerce some type of behavior in your body or brain that shouldn't exist or that doesn't exist naturally. It's actually to just bring these inherent systems back online so that your body can do what it naturally is designed to do, which is to self-heal.
I'm curious because, okay, this is a little bit of a complex or a two-part question. I apologize in advance. But there's the concept of recovery. Is full recovery ever possible? And I always call myself fully recovered. And for me, that's partly just been a mindset.
Mm-hmm.
Not because I don't have the physical stuff to back it up, but I'm healthy, I'm doing all the things. But there are little moments, like not too long ago, I had a crazy hell week at work, just 12, 14-hour days. And by the end of the day, Friday, like I was just frazzled and I was starting to
Yeah.
feel not good. And I thought this feels very CFS like. And I pulled
Mm-hmm.
out some of the brain training type, nervous system calming strategies. And within half an hour, I was feeling significantly better. So this tells me that something like it might still poke its little head up here and there as a little warning sign. So do you still use brain training? What has your experience been with this now that you're recovered?
Yeah, so these are really powerful tools. And as human beings, I love the way that you think about health and the mindset around it. I think for me it's very much the same. I really define fully healed as not having to think about my health. People always want to know, like, how long is it going to take to get healthy, or when did you know that you were fully back? And of course, it's very hard to say, like, oh, February 22nd at 8 a.m. That's when it happened, right? That would be great. But it's much more of a transition. And I realized at some point, several years into my healing journey, that weeks and months had gone by and I hadn't even thought of my health. I had been traveling and eating, normal or whatever kinds of foods and stuff, and it just wasn't a consideration. And so I think that in a sense, we could say that mastery is when you no longer have to think about it. A person has mastered a musical instrument when they're not thinking about what note they're playing or what scale they're in. They're just playing intuitively. They're improvising. And similarly, I think we've sort of mastered our health when our health is just, we trust it to be there for us. Now, that being the case, we are still sometimes stepping into new territory. And the same way that you encounter, stresses at work, and I do as well, life tosses us challenges. And for example, last month I was traveling from my wife had a surgery in Spain, and so we had to go to Spain. And from there, I had to go to a conference in San Francisco, which is quite a ways away from Spain. And I went for the weekend, and then flew back to Spain, and then had a presentation to give in New York 2 days later. And so this was a lot of different time zones, a lot of back and forth, and a lot probably for any human organism to handle. And fortunately, I have a robust toolkit of brain retraining exercises that I happily tapped into to help to modulate, to sort of coast through this physiologically challenging time, because I'm a human being, So, well, I can absolutely say with total confidence that I'm 100% healed. I can also say that having brain retraining tools in the toolkit have just or continue to be, an invaluable part of my life that I can pull out whenever I need them for whatever unique occasions and whatever life calls for.
Yeah, and we think of it in terms of healing, but brain training, I mean, it's exploding and it's being used in so many different areas around phobias, addictions, confidence, learning. So I find I'm adapting things just to suit different parts of my life. So even not even to do with health, it might be, prepping for an interview, or just, those thought patterns that are strongly wired in our brain that, interviews are scary. You can use some of these brain training strategies to change the response that you have to something like an interview. So I think, as with our health, it really serves you to carry this forward into lots of different areas of your life, because I think we're going to start seeing so much more of it in so many different areas, harnessing the power of sort of training our brain and looking at those established neural pathways that have been built over years, and kind of some faster ways to change them.
Yeah, and you raised a really good point, which came up, at least in my mind, as like, I think the goal when it comes to healing and recovery, or forward motion in general, really the goal is not to remove stress from our life. Although at first we might think it is, we might want to remove it because it's so uncomfortable. The goal is to live a full life, right? And a full life, or part of a full life, involves handling some stressful situations, or exposing ourselves, or willingly taking steps in the direction of things that cause discomfort. But being able to modulate through that, and to even get stronger and develop new skills as a result of going through that. And I think that's really the power that brain retraining allows. It doesn't necessarily just stop when we get back to full health. If we want to go beyond, if we want to continuously expand our experience of life, then it's something that we can use, I think, for forever, to surprise ourselves as to what kinds of things we can take on.
Well, I have learned so much from you in this interview, as always. I'm going to watch it again, which I rarely do, but I feel like every sentence you shared is just packed full of insight and really helpful and useful information. So, for people watching that want to learn more about you or the support and services that you provide, can you tell us a bit about that? Because I'm sure they're going to want to know.
Yeah, sure. And thanks so much, Raelan, for having me back on. I've always really enjoyed our conversation. Um, yeah, so for anyone who's interested in our approach to brain retraining, viewing our program, you can check out our website. It's just re-origin.com. And we have a 28-day program there. We've got a free info call people can jump on. And there's also the YouTube channel. If you just kind of want to dip a toe in and get a sense of how we teach things at Reorigin, you can just go to YouTube slash at re_origin.com, or I'm sure if you just put in Reorigin in YouTube, it'll pop right up.
Yeah, well, of course, have all of that linked in the video description. So people watching, I really encourage you to expand that video description and take a look at what's there, because Ben is absolutely amazing. He didn't ask to come back on the channel like many people do. I was begging him. So he's just, if there's any way that you can have his support, his information in your life, I really recommend connecting with him if you can. So yeah, thank you so much, Ben, for doing this today and for everything that you're doing to help people. This is such a massively needed information and support. So I really appreciate you and that you exist and all that you're doing to help people, and for being here today. Thank you.
Likewise, likewise, and thank you. You know, all ships rise as the sea level rises with it, and I'm just, yeah, really, really happy and also grateful that there's more and more people talking about this subject. There's more awareness around it, and there's more options for what people can do to actually help themselves, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. I used to think like people thought I was talking voodoo when I'd start talking about some of these things, but there's becoming more and more awareness around it,
Oh
and
yeah,
the science, that's developed over the 10, plus past years that really backs up um, all of this. So really great to see. And to
yeah.
those of you watching, thank you so much. Our member shout out, channel member shout out today is to Becky Sharp. Thank you so much, Becky, for the support. And thank you to all of you who watch and show support. I look forward to your comments. I love the relationships and connections I've built with so many here. So really just so much love for you. And sending compassion to you as you continue to navigate whatever it is you are currently going through. Keep at it. You have totally got this. I thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video as much as I did, and I hope to see you in this next one.